Hello, everybody. Excited utterance here. It's Hella. And it's late for everyone on the East Coast, a slightly less late for anyone on the West Coast, kind of the middle of the night for anyone in the middle of the US, and it's late morning for me. It's 11 a.m. And for this guy, it's always sleepy time, isn't it? Oh. No, it's getting to be a little bit chilly out. So he's just like, just let me sleep. No. Hello. Hi. Hi. Yes, everybody. Hi, guys. Oh, it's nice to see you again. Already live streamed today, but that was because it's a special occasion. It's Becky Hill's big announcement day. Okay. All right. Anyway, let's go. Hey, Murphy Turfy. Hey, Not Snivels. Hey, Great Success. Yeah, you were a bit early, but that's okay. I sent everyone over here early. I think people have been over and seen the chili stream over on Sean's. That was hilarious. But then it got yeeted, didn't it? Lick and subscribe. Yeah, well, you're not Necrocator. He licks everything. He licks everything. Donna Barkley, hello everyone. Does it snow in Australia? Yeah, it snows down in like Victoria, Tasmania, I think, a little bit. We do have some snowfields. It's amazing the amount of variation in our climate. You'd be amazed. But it doesn't, like, only like in the mountain areas. Amazing. Justice for Diddy. Did he do it? You would be amazed what Diddy did. Were you there the day that I was on Sean's stream and we were going through the complaint against him and the touching of the butts and things? You need to see what Diddy did. It was bad. It was bad. Anyway, off that topic for a minute, we could maybe have a guest today. Put in chat who you would imagine might be my special guest. And I don't know whether this person will show up today, tonight, whatever it is, time for you, or next week. But I have had word that this person would like to come on this stream. And if they do, it will be a special event. A special event. But not sure whether it will be convenient this week or next week, but at some point. And I'll give you another little hint. This person has been on David's Lego stream once. Okay, so we'll leave that up to you guys to guess. Now, why would I say Scott Peterson is innocent? I say this every week, don't I? Why? Why would I say such a thing? Why? Amber Frey. Amber Frey. I don't think Amber Frey's been on the Lego stream. The Hales? Ha ha! Now that will be funny. That would be funny. Do you think Jeremy would turn up with some Lego for this show? Funny. Hey, I actually made it on this time. Hi, Irish. I said Heidi last time, but no. Okay, hello, Nikki. Good to see you. I'll give people a couple more minutes to put their guesses in before I answer. Okay. Right. Why would I say that Scott Peterson is innocent when a jury of 12 found him guilty? Hang on, I'll make that animation happen again. Guilty. Donna Barkley, Scott Peterson is not guilty, not innocent. That's fair. That's a really fair point of view. And you're right. A jury of 12 found him guilty. So that's absolutely fair enough for you to have that opinion. And you know what? I love it when we have differing opinions here. And you know what? I don't I'm not, I know that the name of my stream is Scott Peterson's Innocent, Changed My Mind. The reason is because I am looking at this from a point of view of a new juror. And any new juror should be looking at the person in front of them as being innocent. And he may possibly have a retrial. And what we're going to see today is some of the more physical, testimonial evidence in terms of the things that weren't looked at his previous trial. So up until now, we've been looking at some of the evidence against Scott Peterson that did appear at the trial. So things like his odd behavior, things like the testimony of his girlfriend that he was seeing, and that really was quite damning because it made him look a lot like the liar that he is. He's a liar, no question. Liar, pants on fire. And a lot of the things that the media did make a big deal of and made him look really bad, really, really bad, and definitely like a person who could have murdered his wife and unborn son. So up until now in the series, we've looked a lot at that. Today, we're going to have a bit of a look at the case for him being not guilty, right? And we're going to start to pull at that a bit more. If it's not the Hales, I quit, choke, kind of. Right. So, hey, you ignored my DM. What DM? Wait a minute. Geez, David. Needy much? Needy much? What DM? You haven't DM'd me. Where? On Twitter or? Hang on. I don't see any DM from you. You talking to me, David? What DM? Where did you DM me, David? David's on X. No, I don't see any DM from you. Where? This one, right here. Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh, have you made a meme of me? I haven't watched it yet. Is it something I should play on screen, or is it a little bit risque? David sent me a dick pic. I hope not. Maybe I'll watch that later. Or tell me if it's something that guys, yeah. Dali, you're in this chat group. Could you please tell me whether or not that's safe to bring that up on screen? Awesome. I might have a listen to it whilst we're looking at one of the videos. Listen first. Don't play it on stream. Okay. Chat wars. Nah. We don't have chat wars here. We all like each other here. We're all good friends. It is not okay to play on stream. Okay. Good. Thanks for telling me that. All right. So we're going to have a look at some of the evidence that is a little bit more exculpatory for Scott Peterson. So that means in his favor. All righty. Now, witnesses claim to have seen Lacey walking her dog after the time cops say she was murdered. Pretty hard to walk your dog after the time that cops say she was murdered, right? Can I walk my doggy after I'm murdered? Well, only if you're like, coming back in spirit. What a pretty doggy too. Yeah. Oh, nice looking puppy. All right. So, yeah, and she's really pretty, Lacey. Okay, so there were witnesses. Now, not only that, look at them all. Look at all the sightings. Check them all out. All right, so that's the map that was made of all the times that she was seen actually walking her dog on the 24th of December. And the story was that he supposedly set it up to make it look like she was walking the dog, but she wasn't really, right? Because apparently he let the dog out and the dog was found just like walking around. And that was supposedly some kind of setup so that the cops would find, or that, no, the neighbors would find the dog just out and return the dog. And then it would look like she'd been out walking the dog. But no, she was seen walking the dog. She's living in Mexico. Yeah, that's what happens. And all right, so that's kind of curious, right? Okay, a neighbor, Diane Jackson, said she saw 3 men in a van in front of the home on December 24th. Again, that's the day that she went missing. In the morning, she claimed that Lacey caught robbers in the act and they kidnapped and killed her. That's pretty big. Yeah? Okay. Right. So now Scott's sister-in-law, Janie, has become his most outspoken advocate for his innocence. She has created a war room of evidence and speaks regularly to news media about these and other irregularities in the case. And everyone needs someone like this on the outside to be speaking for them. Like Zach has Solomon, as you know. If you don't know about Zachariah Anderson, go and check out freezachariahanderson.org. Have a look at the Wrongful podcast. There's plenty of things that you can see. Mr. Zach Anderson also is in prison, unfortunately, for the rest of his life. And many people here will tell you that we're very convinced that he is not guilty, not guilty. He's innocent. There's far more pointing to him being not guilty, as far as we're concerned, but maybe because we just know that case so well. But Janie Peterson, his sister-in-law, is absolutely convinced that Scott Peterson is innocent. And she, just like Solomon, goes out there probably most days of her life and talks through all of this evidence and tries to convince people, up against a lot of backlash, I'm sure, that the facts just don't add up. So we're going to hear what she has to say today. But first, we're going to have a look at a short clip. Let's watch Scott's timeline. Okay, so this is more about the actual day in question. So we're going to look past all of the media stuff. We're going to look past all of the hype. We're going to look past all the he's a liar, he's a cheater, all that kind of thing. And we're just going to look flat out what we know about the day. Okay, so, right, I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to share this tab.
Son Connor. The prosecution's changing theories asserted that Scott killed Lacey in their Modesto, California home sometime between the evening of December 23rd and the morning of December 24th in 2002. Scott was asked about the events of these days many times by many people. This timeline is assembled from 18 different sources, including interviews with law enforcement and media, wiretap phone calls, and casual conversation. Detective Brocchini with the Modesto Police Department testified that Scott, quote, told me a lot of truth, unquote. Not only does this timeline show how truthful Scott was about the events of December 23rd and 24th, but it shows also the lack of time he had to commit the crime he's convicted of. Beginning the evening of Monday, December 23rd, Scott said he and Lacey went to Salon, where Lacey's sister, Amy Rocha, worked, and that Amy gave him a haircut. Amy Rocha confirmed this to be true and added that she showed Lacey how to fun flip her hair with a straightener. Amy testified that Scott invited her over for pizza that night, but she already had plans. She said Scott mentioned plans to golf in the morning and offered to pick up a gift basket that Amy had purchased for their papa at a store called Bella Farms. Amy Rocha told police that Lacey was wearing tan pants and a black blouse with small flowers. Scott said when they left the salon, they picked up Mountain Mike's Pizza on the way home. Once home, they ate pizza and watched Monday Night Football. At 8:30 p.m., Lacey spoke with her mother, Sharon Rocha, on the phone to confirm their Christmas Eve dinner plans at Sharon's the next day. Scott said after Sharon's phone call, they continued watching football and then watched the movie The Rookie. Scott estimated they went to bed around 10:30 p.m. and that Lacey wore his blue pajama pants to bed. Amy later identified both the pants and blouse that Lacey was wearing on December 23rd during a search warrant of the house. Lacey's clothing from the 23rd was accounted for after she went missing. She was not murdered or abducted in this clothing, which unfortunately is presented as a fact in the made-for-TV movie The Perfect Husband. On December 24th, Scott estimated Lacey woke up at 7 a.m. She got dressed and placed the blue pajama pants in the hamper, which is where they were found during a December 26th search of the house. Scott said she ate right when she got up to avoid feeling sick, and Lacey's mom confirmed this to be true. Scott said Lacey had already eaten cereal by the time he woke up between 8 and 8:30 a.m. Lacey had a piece of toast while he ate cereal. Scott said the cereal was cinnamon puffins from Trader Joe's. Receipts show that Lacey had purchased the cereal the day before. At 8:40, Lacey logged onto the computer in the spare bedroom while Scott was in the shower. The MSN homepage, a weather site from Yahoo,
No,
and
look
2
at
Yahoo
that.
shopping sites were accessed. One shopping site was for a red Gap scarf and the other a sunflower umbrella stand. Lacey logged off at 8:45 a.m. An analysis of Lacey's typical computer use could have been done to confirm that this was in fact Lacey on the computer. But Detective Wall with the Modesto Police Department was never asked by the investigators in charge to do this analysis. This is evidence that Lacey Peterson was still alive at 8:45 a.m.
Okay.
As Scott got dressed, Lacey told him about her plans for the day. She was going to walk Mackenzie, go
No,
back to the store, and
puppy.
make gingerbread. She needed to buy bread for the French toast they were going to serve at their Christmas brunch. When recalling this conversation, Scott called it cordon bleu French toast to one person and Grand Marnier French toast to another. Scott also mentioned that Lacey had to marinate the French toast. The recipe was on the kitchen counter. It was actually creme brulee French toast, calling for Grand Marnier, and the bread had to be marinated anywhere from 8 to 24 hours. In a recorded phone call with Lacey's mom, Scott described Lacey that morning. He said, quote, that Lacey looked so cute because she was sitting on her bench in front of the mirror, styling her hair the way that Amy had shown her, unquote. This photo, taken the evening Lacey disappeared, shows Lacey's curling iron on the bathroom counter with the cord extended toward the outlet near the toilet.
It's interesting, Murph. Yeah, it does. It sounds loose, but the thing is, he got the name of the breakfast wrong, right? And he called it a couple of different things, and that got called out a few times. Like, oh, he called it French toast, and he called it Grand Marnier or something, and he said it was a few different things. And liar, liar. It's like, who cares? She was baking something delicious for breakfast. I would get it wrong. Whatever. I don't think, like, a lot of these little details kind of, they mean nothing. He lied about some bad stuff. He lied about some really, really bad stuff. But the name of the breakfast, no, I don't think that matters at all. Hey, Cece, good to see you. That does sound delicious, Donna. Yeah.
Housekeeper Margarita Nava, who was there the day before, testified that nothing was on the bathroom counter and no bench was in the bathroom when she left. This is evidence that Lacey was still alive and curling her hair. Scott said he then loaded 3 patio umbrellas from the backyard into the bed of his truck. He was going to store them at his warehouse. Neighbor Kristen Dempwolf walked by while Scott was loading the umbrellas. She said Scott was smiling and called out good morning to her. Scott then went back into the house and filled the mop bucket for Lacey so she could mop the floor. Scott told Detective Brocchini that he and Lacey were first watching the Today Show and then had Martha Stewart on. Scott remembered seeing something on Martha Stewart about meringue and cookies. Cookies and meringue were, in fact, mentioned on Martha Stewart on December 24th at 9:48 a.m. You have to ask why Martha Stewart is on if Lacey is not alive. Scott said he then left out the side French door.
What man would watch Martha Stewart and remember the meringue thing if he didn't have a wife around? Really? Okay, I don't even know really who Martha Stewart is. I just observed. But isn't that a funny observation to make? That why would Martha Stewart be on if Lacey was not still alive and there? Jeez, like why would he? Why would he be watching it? Maybe as a decoy, like maybe to throw people off the scent. A man like you, John, you'd watch Martha Stewart about the meringues.
For work while Lacey was mopping the kitchen floor. Scott gave various estimates of when he left home, all falling between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m. He made the 9-minute drive to his warehouse, checking the voicemail on his cell phone at 10:08 a.m. Scott parked at his office and entered through the pedestrian door. Scott told the police that he had checked his email and sent one email to his boss, who had left him the earlier voicemail. Computer forensics showed Scott continuously logged onto his computer for 26 minutes between 10:30 and 10:56 a.m. He checked email, sent email, and looked up instructions on how to assemble a woodworking tool called a mortiser that he had just received via UPS. There's approximately 20 minutes from when Scott logged off the computer to when he left the warehouse. Scott said during this time, he cleaned up the office a bit and began assembling the mortiser. He opened the roll-up door to the warehouse and unloaded some tools from the toolbox in the bed of his truck. While doing so, he cut his knuckle on the toolbox. He then opened the driver's side door of his truck to get a napkin and thought that maybe his blood would be found there. To support Scott's statements, evidence show that Scott had just received the mortiser on December 20th, and the mortiser was found assembled on a trailer in Scott's warehouse.
Okay, hang on a minute. So during all this time, if the state's theory was correct, Lacey's body would have been what, in the van, or a van in the back of the car, or would he have brought it into the warehouse, or like where would it be? Like what would he have? Or would she have just walked in with him? Maybe like she would have left the house, I would assume. I'd like to know like where she'd be at this point, because he's definitely doing things on the computer. They've worked out that he's in there doing things on the computer. He's definitely there. So I want to know where she is right now.
Forensic testing also showed one drop of Scott's blood on his car door. Please note, there is no room in the warehouse for Scott to pull in his truck and close the warehouse door so he can carry out criminal activity. If Scott had murdered Lacey, he would have been transferring her body from his truck to the boat in broad daylight at his office complex. Scott felt it was too cold to golf, so he decided to head to the Berkeley Marina to try out his new fishing boat. Scott backed up his truck, hooked up the boat, and pulled it out of the warehouse. He then had to close...
Okay, much was made of that as well. Too cold to golf, so he decided to go fishing. Now remember, everyone keeps asking him, why fishing? Why would you go fishing? Oh, and you told people that you were going to play golf. Right, well, there it says that he said that it was a decision that he made there at the at that shed, that it was too cold to play golf. So maybe it was a split-second decision. It's a pretty weird decision, I admit, that it's too cold to play golf, so go out on the water. It's colder out on the water, surely. Like golf, fishing, too cold. I mean, it would have been a better explanation. I just wanted to go fishing. Like my boat's pretty cool. I'd like to go play with my boat. That makes more sense to me. But if he made that decision right there and then, rather than lying about it all day or to everybody, that makes more sense.
The roll-up door to the warehouse from the inside and exit back out the pedestrian door through the office. Scott left the warehouse at about 11:15 a.m. to drive to the Berkeley Marina. He thought it took him about an hour and a half to get there, maybe a little longer because he was pulling a trailer. Supporting Scott's statement, Yahoo Maps shows it's a 1 hour and 36-minute drive to the Berkeley Marina.
Maps.
Scott purchased a boat launch ticket at 12:54 p.m. when he arrived at the marina. Scott gave this ticket to the police the evening of December 24th when they asked him if he had any proof that he'd been at the marina. Scott then launched his boat. He told police he motored north for probably 2 miles and that he was near a little island that had a bunch of trash on it. He saw a big sign that said no landing, and there were some broken piers. He assumed it would be a decent shallow area. He had forgotten some lures he'd purchased from Big Five in his truck, so he used some freshwater jigs from his tackle box. He trolled a bit and then headed back to the marina because it was getting wet. Fitting Scott's description, the island described turned out to be Brooks Island. Prosecution witnesses also confirmed the area to be shallow. Scott's Big Five bag containing his new lures was found by the police in his truck the evening of December 24th, confirming his statement that he had left them there. The fishing pole Scott purchased on December 20th had a freshwater jig on it, and the tag for the pole was in the bottom of the boat. Scott, in fact, was fishing while out on the bay. When Scott arrived back at the marina, he said he talked to a couple guys about fishing and that a couple maintenance guys got a good laugh from him trying to back his trailer down the ramp to load the boat. Detective Rick Armendariz interviewed a maintenance worker named Michael Vestry on December 27, 2002. He confirmed seeing Scott's vehicle and that the driver was having trouble backing the trailer in to get the boat out of the water. Scott estimated being at the bay for about 90 minutes. From the time Scott bought the ticket to when his cell phone records show him leaving the area is about 78 minutes. Scott said when he left the marina, he called Lacey at home and on her cell phone. He said he also called friend Greg Reed and his parents on the way home. He He said he got stuck in some traffic. Confirming his statements, Scott's message was retrieved from Lacey's voicemail by Detective Al Brocchini the evening of December 24th.
Hey, beautiful. I just left a message at home. 2:15. I live in Berkeley. I won't be able to get to Villa Farms to get that basket for Papa. I was hoping you would get this message and go on out there. I'll see you in a bit, sweetie. Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.
End of message.
Scott's cell phone records confirm all of the calls. Scott said he pulled over for gas at a Chevron in Livermore and called Lacey again. Bank records show this purchase was at 3:25 p.m. Scott makes another call to Lacey's cell phone at 3:52 p.m. but does not leave a message. Scott arrived back at the warehouse at 4:15. He said he unhooked the boat and estimated spending no more than 5 minutes in the office. He thinks this is when he sees a fax regarding an incoming shipment. He tells the police he remembers seeing the fax because he was disappointed that the shipment was arriving when it was. Scott then headed home. The incoming fax was time-stamped 11:28 Pacific Standard Time. The fax came in after Scott had left for the marina. Scott estimated he arrived home between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m., which was accurate. He entered through the side gate where he found their dog Mackenzie with his leash on. Scott removed the leash and put it on the patio table. It was discovered later that night that next-door neighbor Karen Service had found Mackenzie in the street with his leash on and put him back in Scott and Lacey's yard.
Really?
Scott said he entered the home and the dog and cats ran into the house. Scott emptied the mop bucket because it looked like one of the cats might drink out of it. He poured the water out near the front walkway and placed the bucket and mops there. He got the mail while outside. Lacey's car was in the driveway, but Lacey was not home. Scott assumed Sharon had picked up Lacey and that she was at her mother's house preparing for Christmas Eve dinner. Scott said his clothes were a bit wet, so he undressed and put them into the washer. He first removed the dirty cleaning rags from the washer that the housekeeper had left from the day before. He added soap and started the washer. He said he often did this when he got home because he worked with chemicals. Scott and Lacey's home had no garage, supporting that there would be nowhere to put soiled clothing.
Okay, so a big deal was made about that. He got in and he washed his clothes. He'd just been out fishing. And he also stated that he often washed his clothes when he got home because he works with chemicals. By the way, he's a fertilizer salesman. Fertilizer stinks. So if I live with a man who was a fertilizer salesman, which is basically poo, right? Yeah, I'd want him to get in the habit of washing his clothes when he got home. I think that would be a thing I would want him to do. Generally, you stink like poo and you need to wash your clothes, dude, or you're coming nowhere near me, right? So you come in the house, you take those off, you put your clothes in the wash and you have a damn shower, or you get none, all right? Including dinner. No dinner, no nothing. Wash your damn clothes. Yeah, you've been around poo all day. So yeah, fertilizer stinks. And hey, Fondian, is that how you say your name? I know you. I've seen you in lots of chats. I don't think I've seen you around here for a long time, though. Welcome. Yeah, fertilizer stinks. Men don't know how to wash clothes. He's obviously guilty. Guilty. Yes. Well, this is another thing that people just kept asking him over and over again. Why did you wash your clothes? You wash your clothes? There must have been just blood and everything all over there. Well, I figure that if he had been doing all the murdery things all day, it would be pretty difficult to get every trace of that out of your clothes anyway. So, yeah. Oh, you're usually on replay, crew. That's nice of you. That's really nice of you. Yeah, so I don't find that to be something that you should be, that should be terribly incriminating. Maybe it's a little unusual for a man to do that, but it's not huge.
The washer and dryer were located in the family room. Scott said he then took out the pizza box from the refrigerator and poured a glass of milk and headed to the shower with a piece of pizza in hand. Officers Letzinger and Avers testified to the pizza box being on the counter when they arrived at the home on Christmas Eve night. Scott said he showered and got dressed. He went back into the kitchen and listened to the phone messages. He listened to the message he left Lacey when leaving the marina, then listened to a message left by Ron Gransky, Lacey's stepfather. Ron asked if Scott and Lacey could bring over whipped cream when they come. This prompted Scott to call Ron and Sharon's home since he was assuming Lacey was already there. This call was at about 5:17 p.m. Scott asked if Lacey was at their home. She was not. Scott told Sharon that Lacey's car was in the driveway, but that she was not home. Sharon asked if Mackenzie was in the yard, and that is when Scott remembered that the leash was on the dog. At this point, the search for Lacey began. Over the next half hour, Scott exchanged 2 more calls with Lacey's mom and Ron. Scott began knocking on neighbors' doors, calling neighbors and friends, and headed to the park with Mackenzie. Sharon told Scott they'd begin calling hospitals so he could check the park, and Ron called 911 at 5:47 p.m. to report Lacey as missing.
Okay. So, just going to go back to... Oopsie. Okay. Now, next thing. We're going to look at this.
About them at trial. So,
hang on a second. All right. So, this lady here, Janie Peterson. Now, I was talking a minute ago about her. She is Scott's biggest advocate. She's kind of like Scott's Solomon on the outside. All right. And I don't know quite how it came to be, or maybe she's... I listened to her interview a little while back, so I can't remember if she explains. But I know a lot of his family didn't really stick behind him that much, or weren't so outspoken. But his sister-in-law really got into the whole case. Maybe she's a bit of a true crime buff or something like that. Maybe they were very close. But she dug in, and it's really down to her that a lot of the things that have happened over the last few years in terms of movement in the case are because she has been pushing so hard. And I've got to say that, good on her. Everyone needs someone to really be their advocate. If there's stories to be told, you can't really tell them from inside prison. If there's stories to be told. If there's not, then too bad, I suppose. If you're guilty, too bad. But if some things haven't gone right, if there has been, if a retrial needs to happen, and that goes for if maybe you're guilty, but maybe the charges weren't correct, maybe the sentence that you're serving isn't just, maybe some things weren't dealt with justly, fairly, and something needs to be looked at, then you need to have someone on the outside who is standing up for you and standing up for your rights, in which case this is the lady who's doing it. Now, so Janie Peterson is his sister-in-law, and she, as you can see, has a war room behind her with everything that she's been looking into. So we're going to have a bit of a listen to an interview that she did, one of many. She's done many interviews, but this one is with KMJ radio station. And she explains a lot of the things that didn't get investigated. Same old story that we hear so many times. Things just didn't get A, investigated, and B, presented at trial. And tell you something, guys, it is eye-opening. It's really eye-opening. We will listen to more we're going to, Cece. There's definitely going to be. We have so many tapes, you wouldn't believe it. All right, let's keep going. So I'm going to get that on.
John Broski and Christina Musan. Making sense of the madness. Broski and Musan. Now.
Good morning. This is Broski and Musan
Hey, John.
on KMJ. I'm John Broski.
And I'm Christina Musan.
Hey, Christina. We have a special guest this hour, Janie Peterson. She is the sister-in-law of Scott Peterson. Want to remind people about the Scott Peterson case, which was almost 20 years ago now, 2002. Lacey Peterson went missing on Christmas Eve when Scott went fishing. And it was a big case.
Yes.
Because it was right here, Modesto.
Right in
then
our backyard.
End up having Fresno connections. And a lot of people thought Scott was guilty, but one person who didn't was Janie Peterson. Janie, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yes, John.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, Scott's been in the news because there are appeals going on, and his conviction is being appealed, and his death penalty has been overturned. Where are we going
Yes.
with the court cases that are going on now?
Well, there's two processes happening. The first is his appeal, and the second is called a habeas petition. The appeal dealt with anything that might have gone wrong in the courtroom. And that when the California Supreme Court ruled on Scott's appeal in August, they found that there was an error made in the courtroom, and it was made by the judge during the jury selection process. He was removing jurors simply because they were against the death penalty, even though those jurors indicated that they could still implement the death penalty. And if that's the case, those jurors needed to remain in the jury pool. So the law that the underlying law of that situation goes all the way back to the 1960s, and it's a ruling by the United States Supreme Court. So the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence based on that error that the judge made. And then additionally, you have this other process going on. Scott's appellate attorneys filed a habeas petition, and that deals with things outside of what the court record shows. Any new investigation, anything you find out that happened outside of the record. And what the issue they are dealing with there is a jury misconduct issue. It was found out that a juror completed her questionnaire inaccurately. All potential jurors were asked if they'd ever been involved in a lawsuit, if they'd ever testified as a witness, or if they'd ever been a victim to a crime. And this particular juror answered no to all those questions, and the answer was actually yes. So that's a jury misconduct issue, and that the California Supreme Court has ordered that, has basically sent that back down to the San Mateo Superior Court and said, we need to take a closer look at this. If in fact the court finds there's a jury misconduct issue, then Scott's guilty verdict will be overturned. And so those are the two different paths that have both part of the appellate process. They're both kind of playing out at the same time, creating a little bit of confusion, but and they both deal with jury issues. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, so there is the possibility.
So that was a couple of years ago, and so that's all done now. The jury misconduct issue, I believe, and Murph, I think you know a little bit more about this than I do. Pick me up if I'm wrong. That led to the overturn of his death penalty, but not to a retrial, clearly, because he's still trying to get a retrial with the LA Innocence Project, and that's right now. That's what's before the court. So what she was referring to was that juror who ended up being called Strawberry Shortcake. And she was the lady who, as Janie said, answered some of her juror questions untruthfully. And that was what I think it's called a habeas petition, was about. And so that was why they were petitioning the court back in 2000, I believe, 2000. So that's what she's talking about there. But now at this point, the LA Innocence Project has picked up his case, and they're trying to get the blood on the mattress that was in that burned out van, the one that was apparently or allegedly connected with the burglary across the road, to be DNA tested. Yes, that's right. So that juror, Strawberry Shortcake, had 2 previous experiences of DV while pregnant and lied about it on her juror questionnaire. That's right. Thank you, Murph. A lot of women said he was a ladies' man. I do think Amber. No, I don't think Amber was the first one. No, and that's come out. Donna, absolutely, that's come out. He's absolutely a ladies' man. Absolutely a cheater. Absolutely a liar. Am I convinced by that he was the murderer? No, I need more than that. Don't think cheating makes you a murderer, though. No, I don't think that puts any weapon in his hands on that day. I need more.
That Scott's verdict could be overturned here, and he would then they would have to decide to do a new trial?
Exactly. So if the jury misconduct issue overturns his guilty verdict, then we would start all over and select a new jury, and Scott would be retried again. All the witnesses would be called.
Luck, Jenny.
The other thing is that based on the August ruling where they only overturned his death sentence, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office announced last Friday that they do intend to pursue putting Scott back on death row. And the process to do that,
I'm just going to go forward a little
the
bit.
next deadline in that process is the San Mateo court might actually have hearings and call witnesses to testify. So witnesses could be sworn in. This particular juror could be called to the stand to testify. They might potentially call other witnesses to testify.
Flick forward a little bit.
None of those neighborhood witnesses who
Here we
reported
go. This
seeing
is the bit I
Lacey,
want.
it's for a number of reasons, but as time goes on, there's no good reasons left. There's no reasons to be ignoring. Well, I think this.
Hang on.
That he's innocent, correct?
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. So you guys have some new evidence.
Yes, we go.
What
This
is
is the bit I want.
the best piece of evidence that you have that would prove that he's not guilty?
Well, I think this case centers around the timeline of the crime. There's so much evidence the morning of December 24th that Lacey was alive, and that evidence is just ignored and completely overlooked. And it's for a number of reasons, but as time goes on, there's no good reasons left. There's no reasons to be ignoring all this evidence that Lacey was alive. There's evidence all throughout the house that she was alive the morning of December 24th. She put the leash on their dog and she walked him around the neighborhood the morning of December 24th. Multiple neighbors saw her. None of those neighborhood witnesses who reported seeing Lacey walking the dog the morning of December 24th were ever had a face-to-face interview with a detective in this case. I mean, that's stunning.
Yeah.
And then you go on to have a tip come in that of a lieutenant at a prison in California overhearing a conversation that Lacey confronted or encountered burglars who were burglarizing a house directly across the street from Lacey, and that house was in fact burglarized. So there's so much evidence that she was alive the morning of December 24th, and Scott left the house at 10 a.m. and that's evidence that he's innocent because she's still alive.
So these witnesses that saw her that never garnered an interview with the police, how did you discover that?
Well, we actually knew about them at trial. So because you have access to the police reports and the tips. One of the problems at trial was just the timeline of the morning, and a neighbor had found Scott and Lacey's dog in the street with the leash on, and she put the dog back in the yard, just after 10 a.m. And a lot of these people saw Lacey after 10 a.m. Like maybe 10:30, later in the morning, and far enough away that it didn't make sense that she could have, if this neighbor's putting the dog back in the yard, how did Lacey have time to go for a 45-minute walk? And so the assumption that was made at the time of trial was that this woman put the dog back. There was no time for Lacey to have gone on a walk, that whatever happened to Lacey happened before this woman put the dog back. And what we know now is that this woman put the dog back before Lacey went on her walk. And that's due to it's not new evidence, but it was newly found evidence. It just kind of got lost in the 48,000 pages of reports that the police handed over. It was a handwritten report, which added to the problem that it got lost because.
Okay, I don't get it. Right. So all those witnesses who saw her going for a walk, what happened to them? Why did no one ever interview them? Why? Like she said a minute ago, and I included this in my I did a TikTok YouTube short earlier, and I usually do those leading up to a live, and I particularly picked out that little piece of audio because when she said that there were multiple witnesses who saw her going for a walk, and that was after he left at 10 a.m. And none of them ever had an interview with a detective. And that's stunning. That was her words. Why? Why didn't none of them ever have an interview with a detective? What happened there? This is very, very strange. Surely that is just one of the very first things you'd ever do is if there's witnesses, you would interview them. This makes zero sense to me. Hayden, for me, that's reasonable doubt right there. That's reasonable doubt right there. But the question is, though, the jury, if they didn't see that, then they wouldn't have had a reason to have reasonable doubt because they never saw those witnesses. Yep. So, yeah, Murph, they weren't trying to exclude Scott. they weren't trying to exclude Scott. They were trying to include Scott, for lack of a better term. So if there were a new trial, I would think they'd be trying to get at least some of those witnesses to testify, the ones that saw Lacey walking the dog that morning. Yeah. I find, like she said, that's stunning. I find that stunning that those witnesses just out into the ether. That's the defense for not calling them, partially, but the burden of proof is on the state, isn't it? The defense shouldn't have to bring a case at all, but I guess, yeah. Sloppy police work, well, yeah. But this is what you learn over a little bit of time, that the police just like to find somebody and pin the narrative around them. They don't try and find something to find the truth. They find the person that they want. Yeah, the issue with the jury, regardless of the evidence presented, many believe the state regardless. Yeah, of course they do. But they're only presented with certain facts. And if the facts that are presented only tell one story, and they don't present witnesses that are exculpatory towards the story, towards the defendant, then what's the jury to do? There's no reasonable doubt to have, is there? The defense shouldn't the defense shouldn't have to prove anything, but sometimes you just got to fight for your life, don't you? And I bet if he gets a retrial, he's going to be fighting for his life. I bet those witnesses are going to come out then. Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
You know, when you're searching 48,000 pages, you're searching typed words to, you know, and this report was handwritten, and it basically, it was the mailman saying that he came by the house at about 10:30 that morning, and the gate was open and the dog wasn't at the property. So what that says is that as the morning played out, what happened is Lacey went outside to walk the dog. She leashed him up. She stepped back in the house to grab a jacket. The dog walked out the front. The neighbor put the dog back in the yard. Lacey came out, walked the dog. She's seen by all the neighbors. The gate's open. The mailman sees the gate open. And then it also, it gives so much more context to the timeline of the morning. It also validates that this encountering the burglars, because that was discounted at trial as well, because the neighbors across the street did not leave until 10:30 in the morning that day.
Let me ask you about
better
this.
understanding of all the evidence that we've always had.
Yeah. Let me ask about the timeline, because you're talking about 10 o'clock and this stuff, because I
Sure.
guess the police theory was that Scott killed Lacey overnight or sometime, and then took her body out of the house they have some kind of timeline for him. And these times you're talking about prove that she was seen after their timeline. Is that right?
Correct. I mean, actually, no one in this case, whether it's the police or the prosecutors, have ever asserted a time. You know, at the beginning of Scott's trial, they stated that Scott killed Lacey the evening of the 23rd or sometime overnight. You know, when evidence came out in trial that Lacey was on the computer the morning of December 24th at 8:30 a.m. in the house, the prosecution just said, well, it doesn't matter, he still did it. So they really don't give a timeline, but part of their theory is that he's dragging her body out of their house in the morning, and you know, that morning Scott's truck was parked in their driveway, you know, with the tailgate towards the street. Witnesses saw his car behind, you know, parked near the street, tailgate towards the street.
Okay.
And if you believe their timeline, you have to believe that he's, you know, dragging his wife's dead body out of their house and putting it in the bed of his pickup truck in broad daylight.
In broad daylight.
And it just there's nothing about this case that makes sense. They can't timeline it out, and you can't, because it doesn't fit the evidence.
All right, we're talking with Janie Peterson, the sister-in-law of
Wow.
Scott Peterson, about her theories about what really happened to Lacey Peterson. And we've got a lot more to talk about. Got to take a break here, and we'll be back. Broski and Musan on KMJ.
Okay, hang on a minute. I don't want this music.
I
don't want this music. I don't want this music.
Street from the Petersons' home.
Okay.
And let's talk a little bit more about that. What exactly happened there?
Well, directly across the street from Scott and Lacey's home was the Medinas. The Medinas lived across the street, and they left Christmas Eve morning about 10:30 a.m. to go visit their son in Los Angeles for Christmas. And that's the same day that Lacey went missing. And when they returned on December 26th, this is the Medinas, when the Medinas returned on December 26th, about 2 days.
Just little discussion time. Okay, so you watched, okay, John, I watched the whole thing when it was happening. My gut feeling then is the same as now. And that's the thing. Like, I feel like people who were paying attention to it at the time saw all the interviews with him. And I know no one got to actually watch the trial unless you were there and you walked into it and were happened to be there every day because it wasn't televised. So there's a degree of speculation involving like what actually happened in that room. Unless you're an actual juror or you were sitting there, you didn't see it, right? But here's the problem. You saw a man who is clearly a liar and a cheater, and he didn't act the way you wanted him to act. And I see that, right? He acted differently to what you'd expect a man to act like when your adored wife, soon to be mother of child, goes missing and then is washes up on the shore. He didn't act correctly. He just seemed so cold. Like you said, Hayden, was it? You said he seemed so cold. I get that, right? I get it. And people were so angry at him, and still are to this day. I get it. Yeah. And that's why now when this is all coming back up again and people are starting to talk about that he might not have done it, it's really bringing up some emotions. I understand all that, but the problem is that people are weird. Like, they don't always act the way you hope or think that they're going to act in these situations. And because someone's a liar and a cheater and is weird and acts strangely, that also doesn't mean that he did it necessarily. All right. So imagine just for a second, like, take yourself out of yourself for a second and just like step over here and go, what if he didn't? Like, what actually if he didn't? And he's just like you say, like a psychopath, like just a really odd guy, like a weird guy who said the strangest things and was a cheater and a liar, but actually he didn't do it. Then what? Then what? Facts over emotions, Joyce. Yeah. Like, what if he actually didn't do it? You can't get there with any other explanation? What about the burglar explanation? What about the fact that there really was a burglary across the road? And what if, okay, let's put it this way, Donna. What if the DNA testing finds her blood on that mattress in the van? What then? What then? So what if a lot of physical evidence actually finds that she was unalived in that van, that burnt out van? Then what? Oh no, I'm not, Hayden. It's not about the media. It's more about your actual feeling about his demeanor, because you said, I think, Hayden, that you found him to be cold. It wasn't the media. You actually said watch the interrogation, and we're going to watch the interrogation next week. We just don't have time this week. So no, not media. Forget the media. More just that feeling of who he is. That's all. Yeah, media can be a problem, and I'm sure a lot of people possibly were influenced by the media, but that's not the question I'm asking at all. It's not actually the question. So my next question is just like, Donna, if what would happen if the DNA testing came back with the blood on the mattress? Because that's interesting to me. I mean, that's probably for me what would be the thing for me. I'm still nowhere with it. I'm still nowhere with it. I don't think he's either right now. I'm just trying to view him as because I wasn't following it at the time. I don't have an emotional connection to it at all. I'm not like, I wasn't buying into it back then. So, but I'm just trying to see, the last couple of weeks we've been looking at his odd behavior. Now I'm trying to see what this Janie has to say and what the new evidence supposedly is. So I'm not there with either, but that thing that they're talking about with these witnesses that were never spoken to by the cops, that for me there's a bit of reasonable doubt. It would have been reasonable doubt if it had been presented to me as a juror at the time. What if he kidnapped her in the van after parking it at the harbour, then took her fishing after? What if he kidnapped her in the van after parking it at the harbour, then took her fishing after? Okay, maybe he stole the van from someone. Don't know. Conspiracy theory. If the DNA ends up being hers in that van, where do we go with a theory that he could have hired people? Maybe. It blows the original theory out, though, doesn't it? All of that, what the state put forward to start off with, it completely, like, that's all gone. Let's like start again. Right, let's keep going.
2 days later at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, they could tell by driving into town that something had happened in Modesto. They saw the national news trucks, they saw the satellite booms, and as they got home, they realized that whatever happened on their street because there was such a large media presence. There was actually police there. When the Medinas got out of their car and approached their home, they saw that their side door had been kicked in, and they didn't even have to call the police. They just walked out to the end of their driveway and said, "We've been robbed." And there was actually police standing in the street in front of their house because the police were actually getting ready to serve a search warrant on Scott and Lacey's home due to Lacey's disappearance. So what they found out over the coming days is that a neighbor of the Medinas and the Petersons had reported, she reported that she had seen a van in front of the Medina home the morning of December 24th at around 11 a.m. and that there was three men with that van, and just that they looked suspicious. And that information was put on a reward flyer. The police sought to solve the Medina burglary, and they did in fact get
Hey, Monique.
a tip on who committed the burglary.
Welcome.
They were given some names, and they arrested two of the men. That they were given multiple names, but they made 2 arrests. Questioned those men. Those men said the burglary happened on the 26th, and the police took their word for it. So the evidence you have that the burglary actually happened on the 24th, the day Lacey went missing, is the fact that you have an eyewitness who drove by saying she saw 3 men in a van in front of the Medina home the morning of the 24th. You have this later tip that comes in from the Norco prison from Lieutenant Aponte saying, "Hey, I have an inmate here who's on the phone talking about Lacey Peterson confronting a burglary on her street." That further corroborated that the burglary happened on the 24th. And then you also had the lack of opportunity for it to happen on the 26th, because on Scott and Lacey Street on December 26th, you had a national media presence. There were satellite trucks all up and down the street. And I believe even the Medinas had to show their driver's license to get onto the street to go home that day. So this burglary was not a smash and grab. This burglary, they took a large safe that was removed from the house with a dolly or a hand truck, multiple tools, thousands of dollars worth of jewelry. There were guns taken. This was not a run in and run out. There was a lot of items taken from this home. And if it was done on the 26th or even, the burglars assert it was about 6:30, around 6 a.m. on the 26th. And there was already media present on the street the morning of December 26th.
So you have an eyewitness that saw these burglars at, they said about 11 in the morning?
Yes.
On the 20th?
11, I want to say 11:10, but I could be wrong.
But
Just
around
after
11,
11 o'clock.
around 11 in the morning on the 24th, an eyewitness.
Yes.
The burglars themselves say, no, it wasn't on the 24th. It was on the 26th at 6 a.m.
Yes.
And the police believe that?
Yes.
Okay, so the end of investigation or what?
End of investigation. And that the tip from Lieutenant Aponte came in like 3 weeks, 2 weeks later. So they didn't have the tip from Lieutenant Aponte yet. But what's interesting about the Lieutenant Aponte from the prison is he says that he actually had to call twice. So he didn't get a return phone call from his first tip. So he calls a second time. And the second time, he has signed an affidavit saying that he spoke with someone from the Modesto Police Department, that he made a recording of the phone call, and that he spoke with Modesto Police about it, that Modesto Police interviewed this inmate via phone. And where we sit today is that the Modesto Police Department claims they have no record of ever calling and speaking with that inmate. They claim they have no record of ever receiving the recorded phone call, and we don't have that recorded phone call. It's gone. So it was a critical piece of evidence that was completely ignored. So not only do you have the police ignoring all the neighborhood witnesses who are seeing Lacey walk the dog, there's no follow-up on this Aponte tip. And then you also had, Lacey, she was wearing jewelry when she went missing. And one of the pieces of jewelry she was wearing was a Croton watch that she had inherited from her grandmother. Well, in about 2 months after Lacey went missing, police found searching pawn records, and they found a pawn record that a Croton watch had been pawned on December 31st at a pawn shop about a mile from Lacey's home.
Okay.
And they found that ticket, and then there's no follow-up. They did absolutely nothing to follow up. There's no record in the 48,000 pages of discovery that they went to follow up on that Croton watch. And what's really interesting is that there was a series on A&E, which now you can watch on Hulu. It's called The Murder of Lacey Peterson. And at one point they showed some extra scenes, and they only aired these extra scenes that they filmed once. But one of those extra scenes was an interview with this pawn shop owner. And this pawn shop owner said in that that he was contacted by the Modesto police and was asked to put the watch on hold.
See, my only problem with that, Donna, is I have two problems with that. Firstly, we weren't there. We don't know for sure, right? And this is why I love that at least some trials in your country get to be seen completely transparently. There's cameras in the courtroom. We don't get that here, right? So not only do we not get cameras in our courtroom, it's very hard to get any documents, transcripts, things like that. We don't have this Freedom of Information Act thing that you guys have got. So count yourselves like very lucky, blessed, whatever kind of word you like to use in the US, because there's a lot more transparency with your justice system. And yeah, when you can make a judgment personally and feel comfortable that things have gone according to the rules. But in this case, no, there's no record other than just the transcripts. And like I said before, yeah, it's fine. Okay, there's transcripts, but you can't see what happened. You can't hear the inflections in the voices. You can't see the people's faces. It misses a lot. You miss a lot of that back and forth. It's just not the same. And the stuff goes down on the record, but it's just, I feel like you miss a lot. And it's far less likely that people are going to look at it, right? So when it's streamed, when it's live, when it's on television, back then it would have been more likely television. It would have had a lot more eyes on it, and there's a lot more checks and balances then. So very hard for people to be sure that it was fair, because like I've heard so many people say, "Oh, I watched the trial," and then I say to them, "But how? It was not televised." And they go, "Oh, I watched the documentary." It's like, that's not watching the trial. That's not watching the trial. No, that's not. Okay, so there's that. And the other thing I just want to say is, if the trial excluded key witnesses, then how's that a fair trial? I don't know. Anyway, hello everyone who's just coming in. Nice to see you. And we're having a nice discussion here. Documentary is filtered through someone else's opinion. Yeah, of course. And then there's always like dramatic music and stuff like that. It's always the dramatic music.
Well, there's no police report about that. That police report's never been handed over. So So either they didn't follow up on the watch, or they followed up and they're not handing over the follow up. So there's just too many unanswered questions in this case.
Yeah.
All right, we're talking with Janie Peterson. She is the sister-in-law to Scott Peterson.
Janie, just want to ask, we were talking about this burglary. You're talking about this lieutenant in the prison who overheard this conversation. Are people like that and these witnesses that saw Lacey walking her dog after she was supposedly dead, are these people available to testify?
They should be, yes. There's a few of the witnesses who saw Lacey that morning who have passed away, but most of these witnesses would be very likely called to testify if there's another trial, whether that trial be for the penalty phase or whether it be a whole new trial to determine guilt. So yes, they would very likely be called to testify.
But you are convinced, based on these eyewitnesses who saw Lacey walking her dog that morning, and the timeline with the mailman and the neighbor across the street, and this burglary information, that proves to you that Scott could not have done this.
Correct.
And there's
Correct.
more, right?
And there is more. There is more. One of the other tips that I hadn't brought up yet was one we just actually released to the public this year. We put it on our Facebook page. We have a website, a Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, if you want to follow or kind of get more information on any of the things that I've talked about. But one of the tips that we just released a few months ago is a tip that came in through America's Most Wanted. In early January, America's Most Wanted ran a story on Lacey's disappearance, and a tipster called in and basically had overheard two people talking about, not even overheard, he had a conversation with two men talking about Lacey's murder, and he named those men, and America's Most Wanted deemed it as a 100% credible tip. It named suspects, it named circumstances, and the Modesto police just, their follow-up was to go attempt to talk to one of the people named in the tip, and the guy said he'd been in jail on December 24th, and that was basically the end of the investigation. So another tip that just didn't get followed up on as it should have been, that was bringing in information about what did happen to Lacey.
What do you think of the Modesto Police
sorry.
Department?
What do I think? I think they woefully investigated this case, and I think there's way too many questions that are not answered for someone to be on death row. I don't think you can talk about this case without also talking about, where Lacey and Connor's bodies were found. Scott went fishing on December 24th.
Hi, Monique. Thanks for dropping in.
The day they went missing, and 4 months later, he went fishing in the Bay Area. And 4 months later, in April, that's where Lacey and Connor's bodies, they were found separate, about a mile or so apart, but they were found on the shore of the San Francisco Bay. And to a lot of people, that closes this case. Their bodies were found where he went fishing. But it needs to be noted that Scott's alibi was immediately and widely publicized by Christmas morning, that he had gone fishing in the Bay. And it was of great concern to us that the police were releasing that information, because we didn't know who had Lacey and we didn't know what their intent was. And so we had a fear that by releasing this information, that whoever took her, if they had an intent to harm her, that they would put her body where he said he was. And so when that is actually what happened 4 months later, that wasn't to us. That didn't mean Scott was guilty. That meant someone took advantage of his publicized alibi. So that needs to be pointed out. I think people, you have to kind of take the whole package of how it played out when you look at the circumstance of where their bodies were found.
We're talking with Janie Peterson, who's the sister-in-law to Scott Peterson. Janie, let me ask you then, is what you think happened is that she confronted the robbers and that she was kidnapped and held for a time potentially, and then killed with her and their son's body dumped in the Bay? Is that kind of a very simplified version, but is that what you think happened?
There's more evidence that happened than there is evidence that Scott murdered Lacey and Connor. And until it's, properly investigated, when you're on the defense side of things, when you're a defendant and you're hiring private investigators, how you can investigate a crime is not even close to the resources that a police department has or the government has to investigate a crime. So, we're having to come at this from a very different angle and perspective than if the Modesto police would have done it right the first time.
We can't finish this conversation without bringing up Scott's affair with Amber Frey.
No, we can't.
And the fact that he was talking to her after his wife went missing. What do you think about his whole affair and how that impacted this?
And perception as well, the public's perception.
Well, first, there's no excuse we make no excuse for Scott's infidelity. And
Or him just
unfortunately, though,
being
that I believe that is what led to him being convicted of murder. If you look at, there was a whole lot of evidence that Scott was an adulterer. You know, he traveled for work for a living, and unfortunately, he was weak when it came to women. And you put those two things together, and you know, Scott was unfaithful. So I think when Lacey went missing, and you know, Amber found out about it, she went to the police, rightfully so, and said, hey, you know, I've been seeing this guy who told me he wasn't married, and he's clearly married. And you know, the police asked Amber to start recording their phone calls, and she did that. And so yeah, when you listen to those phone calls, it's what you're listening to is someone who is being prompted by the police to call, to record the calls. And Scott is recounting to her a lot of the lies that he told her while he was seeing her. You know, Scott had lied to Amber and said he wasn't married. And so pretty much everything Scott said to Amber was a lie. And so what you're hearing on those phone calls are all the lies. They're infidelity lies is what they are. But those lies were used to convict him of murder. If you look at the circumstances around this murder allegedly occurred on December 24th, 2002.
Hey, Malcolm.
Every single thing that Scott said to Modesto Police or Department of Justice people who interviewed him, everything Scott said about the circumstances of December 24th to the police is true. There's not one lie to law enforcement about the events of December 24th. Scott's lies are about Amber, and they're to Amber.
Were there any things in those Amber conversations that linked him with any kind of guilt here? Or was there anything? And there was a lot of tape, as I recall, of her conversations.
Yeah. There's not. In fact, I think at some point in early February, the phone calls ceased or the wiretap ended. I don't know which. You know, there was a point where Amber said, "I don't think we should talk anymore," and they never spoke again because she wasn't initiating the phone calls. So. No, there was no evidence presented of any. In fact, in the phone calls, you hear Amber threaten Scott, "I'm going to go to the cops," and he says, "If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. You need to do. I'm not going to try to stop you." So there comes a point in the phone calls. I mean, the first week of the phone calls, you know, she's pretending she doesn't know he's married and his wife is missing. And after about a week of phone calls, he admits to her, "Look, I'm married. My wife is missing," and they do continue to talk at that point, but it's more him. You know, it's basically her interrogating him, you know, what's going on. And, you know, so at that point, the phone calls are a little more reality based as far as you know, there's an acknowledgement that he's married, that Lacey's missing, and the conversations do continue in that context. And that's, you know, Scott feels he owes Amber an explanation, and he certainly did.
There was also some curious reporting about Scott when he was arrested. You know, California Attorney General Bill Lockyer said, you know, they thought he might be trying to flee to Mexico. There were reports that he was found with a lot of money. He dyed his hair. He had a goatee. You know, what about all that? It seemed like peculiar behavior around his arrest.
You know, that's something that is explained really well in the Murder of Lacey Peterson on Hulu or A&E. But you know, basically what you had happening is, you know, Scott had really almost become nomadic. He was kind of chased out of his own home. He was, you know, coming to Southern California. Most of his family, we all live in San Diego, and he was coming down to San Diego to spend weekends with us. And he was, you know, kind of living out of his car. As far as his appearance goes, he didn't look much different than he looked when police served a second search warrant on his home in February. He was becoming a very recognizable person. He was on the cover of the National Enquirer every week. And he did do things to, you know, change his hair color, and, you know, he grew a goatee, but it certainly wasn't to evade law enforcement. And there was, the day of his arrest, he was being followed, and he perceived he was being followed by media. So, you know, the officers that were following him were in unmarked cars. And he was actually noting all the license plate numbers. He had done the same thing the week before and was giving the numbers to his attorney, saying, "I'm being followed by these people. Here's the license plate numbers." So Scott really perceived he was being followed by media. You know, the day of his arrest, he was arrested near Torrey Pines Golf Course in San Diego. That's 30 miles from the Mexican border. I don't, you know, I think when you hear something like that on the national news, that Scott Peterson is arrested 30 miles from the Mexican border, I don't think your average American knows that San Diego sits on the Mexican border. I mean, I'm talking to you today from probably 23 miles from the Mexican border. So it becomes a narrative. You know, Scott Peterson arrested, you know, 30 miles from the Mexican border, and it created this perception of flight. But when you listen to the testimony, there's not any law enforcement officer who testified that they felt Scott was going to flee.
Janie Peterson, thanks so much for your time this morning. Before we say goodbye, I just want to give you an opportunity. If anybody wants to, I read your blog this morning. Very interesting. You lay out a very good case, as you did here on the air. And so if anybody wants to go to the website or the Facebook page, how do they do that?
Type it into their computer.
On most formats, our name is Scott Peterson Appeal.
Yeah.
So our website is scottpetersonappeal.org.
Yeah, that still exists actually, and there's plenty of good stuff on there. It's not the most user-friendly website, but there's some good resources on there. So if you're interested, go on there. If you don't like the whole idea of him getting an appeal, maybe stay away. Okay, and yes, Murph, were you not watching last week? We did Amber Frey. We did a little bit of Amber Frey phone calls last week, but we just did a little bit of them, just a little bit of a taste tester. But we've got all of them, and I'm making up the ones with the pictures behind them and the captions, and it's all very cool. So yeah, have a look at my YouTube shorts or my TikToks. You'll see there's a TikTok of them. We're going to start from the beginning though, because I just showed you like the January 6th one, which is the one where he says to her, "Oh, by the way, I have a wife and she's missing." But I've got them going all the way back from the Christmas Day or something. So yeah, that's happening now. Before we finish up, I've got an expert here who is going to talk a little bit about the debunked expert witnesses that appeared at the trial. So this is the scientific stuff. And it's just a short one, but I'm going to hang on. We'll just look at this and then, okay. So let's watch some of the prosecution's evidence that was presented at the trial. And this guy, he's the guy with the cactuses. If anyone who was in the watch party in the Discord the other day, this is Cactus Man, but he's not with his cactuses this time. Just a second. And hang on. So we share this tab instead. All right, this guy here. And let's make sure I've got lots of sound going for him. Cool. Expert. People who call themselves experts. Yeah. Alrighty. Let's just watch a little bit.
It was actually pretty straightforward. They believed that Scott Peterson strangled or smothered Lacey Peterson on the night of December 23rd or on the morning of the 24th, but they didn't know when it happened, and they argued they didn't have to prove when it happened. They only need to prove that it happened. They believed after that, when he went on what he called the fishing trip, he dumped the body in the San Francisco Bay. And his motivation would have been money, like life insurance money, and of course, the affair with Amber Frey. So taking a look at the evidence on the side of the prosecution, we see both physical and behavioral evidence. So in terms of physical evidence, they found a strand of hair in pliers on the boat, but I don't think this really was too convincing. They had this theory that Connor died on 12/24, and they supported this theory by using an expert who testified about the fetal bones and how he measured them and how the time of death could be calculated with that measurement. But the expert used an incorrect method. He used a method that deviated from the method that he said he used. So that was problematic.
Okay, so yeah, if you get an expert witness in, you got to make sure that he uses the method that he said he's going to use. That's kind of important. You don't pay tens of thousands of dollars for an expert witness to come in and then they go and use a different method. That bad.
They also had evidence about the dogs picking up Lacey Peterson's scent at the marina. But this is pretty interesting. The dogs were actually unqualified. I'm sure they were nice dogs. I don't have anything against the dogs.
The dogs were unqualified. Woof. That's problematic. Dr. Grande. Yeah, I think this is Dr. Grande. I think that's the name of this guy. Yeah, Dr. Grande. There it is. It's written there. And in the bottom right-hand corner, if you can see really, really tiny, there's a teensy little watermark of him. Really, really cute little weirdo watermark. Don't talk about the dogs. All right. So there's obviously police dogs, and he says that they're unqualified, but he's got nothing against the police dogs. He likes the dogs. Sure, they were nice dogs. Yep. But he's about to debunk the dogs.
But evidently they were not qualified. They weren't very good or accurate at their job. And also the method that was used, the way the dogs were used, was actually incorrect. And one example of this is the scent. They gained the scent from cross-contaminated items. So items that Laci Peterson touched and used, but also items that Scott Peterson could have touched or used. Now recently we see that an expert has weighed in on this and indicated that the searching protocols that were used in the case were virtually guaranteed to produce an unreliable result. So the dogs really weren't used correctly, and again, they didn't appear to be qualified.
No, you keep saying that. These poor dogs. And then I'm sure the dogs weren't the ones who called themselves experts. All these people who say they're experts, they really got to stop it. Just got to stop it. Just stop calling yourself expert. Just like expert idiot.
Prosecution also called an expert who was supposed to understand how bodies would move in water, because again, with the theory of the crime, Scott Peterson must have dumped the bodies, but of course they washed up somewhere else, and the prosecution had to explain that difference, and they explained it through this so-called expert. But as it turned out, on the stand, this individual admitted that he had done no studies, he had no education or expertise in terms of how bodies move in water. He also indicated...
Wait, did he get a phone and just like chuck it around like... Now, the dogs are going to have to take the stand and be qualified as experts. Here's my CV. Okay. Also, so what he's saying is that there was some sort of expert to do with the way bodies move in water. All right, I've heard of some pretty out there like expert qualifications in my time, but the way bodies move in water, okay, that's new. That's new. Righto.
And I think this is particularly important, that he was aware of the prosecution's theory of the crime. Now, it's interesting because his testimony was key in getting the convictions on Scott Peterson. And yet he's saying he really doesn't know what he's doing, and he was aware of what result he was supposed to find. And I'll talk about this more in a moment. Now, we also see that one of the detectives said that the house smelled like bleach.
Wait a minute. The expert didn't know what result he was supposed to find. Well, there you go. When you're paying your expert, you should probably tell them what they're supposed to say, right? Otherwise, how are they going to get their check?
Out there was no evidence to support that. And we see that there was really no evidence anywhere else. There was no evidence on Scott Peterson, in his boat, in his yard, in his house, in his vehicle, anywhere. So this just seems kind of unusual that there be no physical evidence at all on Scott Peterson or the places where he would have needed to be in order to commit the crime. Now getting into the behavioral evidence, I think this is particularly interesting because we see this in a number of cases, right? We see that there was this feeling that the police had that Scott Peterson was too calm, also that he was keeping secrets. So allegedly he kept the fact that he had a boat secret from Laci Peterson. We find out, of course, that this wasn't true. And really what the police were saying was Scott Peterson was not reacting in the right way. And I'll talk more about this in a few moments. So now moving over to the defense. Well, the defense had a few different components. They challenged, of course, the prosecution's assertions. They indicated that the timeline could be accounted for, right? So Scott Peterson went fishing And they kind of showed the different
Fishing.
steps in that, going to the warehouse, getting the boat, towing the boat to the marina, all this. And they also looked at this idea that he didn't lie, right? There weren't lies told in the beginning, and then you see him changing his story. That didn't seem to happen. And usually when people are guilty of murder, they do change their story once or maybe even more. So he didn't appear to lie. He went fishing and came home, and that's...
Yeah, okay. So, dude, he lied about a ton. I think you should clarify that. He lied, just not about that. That's important, right? So he lied about a bunch of stuff, but just not about what happened on that day in regard to what he told the police. So I think that's it's a really important thing to differentiate between, because he told a bunch of different stories to like Amber, to his wife, to his in-laws, to a bunch of different people regarding like, oh, I'm going fishing, I'm going golfing, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then he told all these other things throughout like the period of a few months about like who he was seeing, what he was doing, la, la, la. So yeah, he's a big fat liar. But in regard to what he went in and told the cops, he kept to that story and never really, in fact, he didn't deviate from it. So that's important. And I think that's what this guy's getting at. Should have probably been a little bit clearer about that. Hey, David. Yes. What is this now? Okay. So this is Dr. Grande. And Dr. Grande is talking, he was talking mostly about the physical evidence and the experts that were at the trial. And he really dissed the expert doggies. He said they weren't qualified. What did the doggies ever do to him? And he dissed a few other experts, just said they weren't really experts because, you know, basically experts, people who call themselves experts, they've got to stop it. Stop it now. Experts that aren't experts. And this guy, I don't even know if he's an expert. But we're listening to him anyway because he's kind of entertaining.
Seems to be supported by quite a bit of evidence. Now, I mentioned before the prosecution had that witness that testified about the length of the fetal bones to establish when Connor had died. And the defense called a witness to counter that prosecution witness. And this witness was going to testify that the unborn son, Laci Peterson's unborn son, lived until well after the mother was reported missing. So that would, of course, kind of tear apart the prosecution's case. Now, this individual, his name was Dr. March. He was a fertility expert. And on the stand, he kind of came apart under cross-examination. So when the prosecution was asking him questions, he kind of came apart, and he said he was sorry, that he made an error, and he even asked the prosecutor to cut him some slack. This actually happened on the stand. So this was fairly devastating to the defense. Other evidence they had, though, was that there was a burglary that was committed in the house across the street from the Petersons on December 24th. Now, this gets a little mixed up because the prosecution had a different theory about when it happened, but that was still something the defense brought up. So if there were burglars there, then it makes sense that those burglars would be dangerous. So it offers an alternate theory of the crime. And there were also a number of witnesses that saw Laci walking her dog after Scott Peterson already left to go fishing. So if that's true, if Laci was walking her dog after Scott Peterson left, there's no way he could have committed the murder. So that was a good point for the defense. Of course, ultimately, the defense failed. And Scott Peterson, of course, as I mentioned, was convicted and sentenced to death. So now moving to my thoughts on this in terms of a mental health, personality, and human behavior aspect, and also my thoughts on whether Scott Peterson is guilty or not guilty. So obviously, I don't know for certain. I don't know if he did it or not, but I will offer my opinion on this. And I have a lot of difficulties with this case. I have a few different problems about what happened in this case, the kind of procedures that were followed and how they didn't really follow the scientific method and really didn't represent good investigative practices.
Yeah.
And how
so this was 4 years ago. Donna? 4 years ago. Murph, you're giving out memberships all the time. You're so awesome. I love ya. Thank you so much. Let me see who gets the memberships. Cornelius Random. That's a random name. Hi, Cornelius. Was gifted a membership by myself. Haley Wolf, Renz, Els Mickelson Stearman, Sherry Reed. Is that it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Welcome, guys. Go and click on the link. Stray says, new members, find your membership perks under the memberships tab and find your link to Discord. Yay! Welcome. Thank you, Merv. Oh, you're just so awesome. Appreciate you so much. Every single time you just you being in chat, just you being with us, with me on this journey. I appreciate so much. But you giving gifts like that, it warms my heart. Thank you. I just love you to bits. Love you to bits. So yeah, this was 4 years ago. But I mean, he's commenting on things that happened at the actual trial. So I still believe that it's just as relevant because it would therefore, I suppose, debunk if they were to bring back the same experts or do the same sorts of things at another trial, they'd need to bring something else in, wouldn't they? They need to bring new experts in or new evidence to refute this or to counter this. Interesting. I have to take the trash out, but it's cold out and I've got laser nipples. Really, Bobby? I wondered if you had laser nipples. I guess. I drive overnight, so I listen to lots of people on replay. Oh, thank you, Fondian. And that I swear, probably 90% of the audience is replay. If you have a look at the views are they go up sometimes over 1,000, even though I only get sort of 30 in chat sometimes. But that's why I'm asking what people would prefer, and I'd like you to please answer the poll if you see it there, because I've just been experimenting with this 9 p.m. time slot, 9 p.m. Eastern, because I was trying to get to cater for the West Coast because this incident happened on the West Coast. But the chat numbers have been a bit on the low side compared to when I go earlier, like 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So I'm wondering whether or not I should go back to my usual time slot. But it's only my second time running it at this time. So I'm wondering if I just need to get more into my groove here and just promote it a little bit more. But yeah, just see what you guys have to say. Would you prefer? So far, it's a bit split. So I might maybe I need to ask also some people get people to get into the comments as well. You're central, so either 8 p.m. or 5:30. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. So people who are central sort of don't really mind. That makes sense as well. So it's nice for me because this is the middle of my day. So it starts at 11 a.m. for me. So it's nice.
How really Scott Peterson's behavior was used against him in a way that doesn't seem to be really supported by scientific evidence. So in terms of that aspect, in terms of his behavior, we see that in this case, there's really a certain way that somebody's supposed to act when someone dies. And Scott Peterson didn't act that way. And that kind of got him in trouble, right, in terms of the investigation. But this brings up an important point. Do we really know how somebody's supposed to act when their spouse is missing or when they've committed a murder or both? Murders are not that common, and people going missing really isn't that common either, right? If you go and talk to a married couple that's been married 10, 20, 30, or say 40 years, and you ask them, how many times has your spouse gone missing? A lot of them will probably say it's never happened. So we don't really have a lot of observations of these kind of extreme situations on which we can make these judgments. There is no normal way to act. There is no correct way to act. Or if there is, it hasn't been established through scientific research. So we don't really know. Yet again, this was really used against Scott Peterson. I've seen people react in all kinds of ways to all kinds of stressful and unusual situations, right? Terrible things will happen in people's lives, and they'll be calm and collected and kind of even calculating sometimes. Other times I've seen events occur that seem really minor or just routine, and people have incredibly strong, dramatic reactions.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not really kind of buying this argument that there's a certain way to act.
Like, oh my God, I lost my keys. I've done that. You should see my parents when they can't get a car park. Like, you would think the world had ended, like legit ended. You would think that there had been a murder. Like, I'm just like, it's a car park. Get on with your life on this earth. Just drive around and wait for someone to leave. It's okay. It's okay. It's a car park. It's fine. It's what he actually did, not how he acted. I believe you that's how you feel about it. I think a lot of people judged him based on his reaction, though, Hayden. I think you're probably a much more measured person. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are just like, he's a narcissist, he's this, he's that, and he's just not sad enough. Bye. Good night, David. Good night, David. Night. Did they hand a rule book out for how to act? That I missed. Look, if you don't want to get yourself like treated like a suspect, I probably would be sad. He did seem sad to me, like, but just not as distraught, I guess, as maybe you'd expect. Maybe as you'd expect. Damn dingoes. And okay, so I'll finish this up in a second, but I did want to mention, and I mentioned it on I think the first stream that I did on this one. The very first case I ever covered on this channel was Lindy Chamberlain, and Lindy Chamberlain was a dingo ate my baby. And please go and have a look at my very first video. She didn't act sad enough. In fact, she acted really weird. She said and did really weird things. She even spoke about the way the dingo is known to crush the baby's skull and stuff like that. And she spoke about it in this really cold, horrible manner. And she was absolutely, the cops found lots of ways to make it look like it was her that did this, because it affected tourism in the area around Ayers Rock, the big rock in the middle of our country. And she was convicted. And if it weren't for the fact that her baby's vest was found mauled clearly by a dingo, wild animal, 4 years later, she would still be in prison for the rest of her life. So it was her behavior really was what put her away, unfortunately. Some people control their emotions instead of show them, though, and a peer called Dingo ate his emotions. Yeah, it was a really, really sad case. And John, another 5 memberships. Wow, look at you. John, you're so kind. Oh, Scott McGuinness was gifted a membership. I haven't seen Scott for a little bit. I have to let him know. Catherine Byrne, Malcolm Wilhelm, Shelley Skeens, Psychedelics, and Rossman Ranch. Awesome. Thank you, John. You're also just amazing. You're just amazing. And you're such a funny guy. You're always bringing out all the funny stuff. Sometimes I can't bring up your chats on screen. I have to read it first. You naughty one. Love ya. Good night, David. And Stray, you going to bed? Good night, love. Good night. You rarely show emotions. I usually smile, joke, regardless of the situation, because that's how I handle things. Yeah, that's pretty normal. Okay, we'll just watch a tiny little bit more and we'll finish this off.
When bad things happened, and that he didn't act that way. The bottom line here is that the police believed he was supposed to be distressed, crying, and inconsolable, and he wasn't that way. So what happens, and this is why this is a problem, what happens here is that little misinterpreted observations, so small things that the police saw, lead to more significant events, like the police obtaining search warrants. So really, Scott Peterson's behavior, right, his demeanor kind of directed the investigation. So this really brings up this argument about the role of the police, right? It's their job to collect evidence and to find the truth. They have to be open to the truth, whatever the truth is. So that includes that Scott Peterson may have been not guilty of this and somebody else was responsible. But instead, they used Scott Peterson's behavior to form their theory of the crime. Again, it directed the investigation. They did this with no mental health training, yet they used his personality and his behavior to make important decisions. Now, as I mentioned, I've been a counselor for a long time. I've seen people react in all kinds of situations, and I don't know what to make of Scott Peterson's demeanor. That's with years of training and experience.
Okay.
So how could...
All right. So I'm not going to keep going with this guy, but I will tell you something. He believes that Scott Peterson's guilty. So just isn't that interesting? So he, even after talking about all of those exculpatory ideas that the witnesses for the prosecution were unqualified, the doggies were unqualified, the expert who used a method that was against what he said he was going to use. It was completely the wrong method. The one that was not qualified to talk about the way bodies move in water. And then when he even just went on for quite a while about how the behavioral evidence is not really something that you can use because people act differently depending on different situations. So spoiler alert, he still thinks that this guy's guilty. So interesting. That's his view. And I think he probably followed the case from the beginning. So I don't know why that's his view, but that's his view. Interesting that people who even have looked into it and dissected a lot of the physical evidence and debunked some of the physical evidence have a view as such. But my issue so far, having looked at what I have looked at, and there's still so much more to unpack, my biggest issue so far is that there's all those witnesses that never got to be interviewed, and they're the ones who saw her that day alive, walking around with that dog. That to me is, that's iffy. Oh, sorry. Also, if her blood does turn up on that mattress in that burned out van, the whole storyline is just up in flames. No pun intended. No pun intended at all on that one. Let me just have a little look at something. Okay. So tomorrow, guys, I have 2 streams happening again. Everything's crazy at the moment. Everything's crazy. So let me just have a look and tell you. So number 1, Nick Godejohn's story part 6 is happening tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And I haven't even told my mods about all this yet because I've just been 5 minutes before the stream started. I was busy popping all these online. And the other one is, where is it? Did I go and, there we go. The other one is one there. So, right. So at 6:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, we have the Nick Godejohn story live. I'll just get rid of this dude. Goodbye, mister. Yep. So Nick Godejohn story part 6, Gypsy Rose saga continues with Nick's fight for justice live. That's just going to be a short one tomorrow. So that's from 6:30 p.m. Eastern. And then after that, we're going to go straight on into, it'll be a different stream. We're going to shufti everyone over via, I'm going to raid myself. I brave myself. And we're going to go straight into Frankie and Hildebrand, the unseen exhibits, sensitive content, part 2. So we'll go straight into that tomorrow. So yeah, it's all on, guys. Make sure that you are there for that one. We have a lot more stuff to go into. Now, I'll give you a bit of a heads up. We're going to get into the audio content, so the audio interviews, and there's some pretty hectic information about their cult activities. When I say cult activities, their religious extremism that led to the abuse of those children. So yeah, get ready. There'll be a bit more body cam and things like that, but the really intense stuff that came out of those unseen exhibits that have just been unsealed, it's all in those audio files, guys. So make sure you're there for that one. I am going about the work of making that all easy for us to hear and see, putting all the subtitles on it, and just, yeah, making it so that we can digest it all, and just being really sensitive about what is shown. Some people are showing a lot of the photos of the children in their malnourished and gagged kind of state and things like that. That's not what I'm doing on my streams. I'm interested in what led to it in these women's minds, all that kind of thing. So, and also if Kevin Frankie had any real involvement in this is interesting to me too. So, yeah, come along for that one. I should get a nap. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, please come along and be part of that, because yeah, that's something that I'm working really hard on, to get that information to you all and do it in a sensitive way. Because I think it's really important that we notice the signs of these things happening. So, because no kid should have to go through this stuff ever. All right. Thank you, everybody. That's it. It's 12:48 p.m. now, so I should probably go do some things around here. Get on with stuff. Love yous all. Love you to bits. Love you to bits. Love you to bits. Thank you, everybody, for being here, especially everyone who stayed up late. Love you, my mods. Love all of you. You're just the best. Good night.